many sectors of Canada's economy have been clobbered by U.S. tariffs, Bombardier's private jets are selling globally. And so they're building a new plant, expanding.
We'll be able to change the way we're producing to bring more efficiency in the way we're producing the airplane.
I think they're looking at flexibility, to have the ability to not have to build a whole new plant for the Gripen, just reallocate capacity between Toronto and Montreal to create that space.
NATO just lost its eyes in the sky. 7 allied nations, including the United States, walked away from Boeing's flagship surveillance aircraft program, leaving a critical gap in the alliance's ability to see and respond across an entire theatre of war. At the same moment, Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney quietly opened the door to a Swedish alternative that could cut Boeing and Lockheed Martin out of the largest defense contract in Canadian history. The question now being asked inside NATO capitals is simple. If America won't deliver, who will? On December 30th, 2025, France signed a $1.3 billion deal with Swedish defense company Saab for 2 Global Eye airborne surveillance aircraft, with options for 2 more. Deliveries are scheduled between 2029 and 2032. The timing was not accidental. France signed this contract just weeks after NATO's E-7 wedge-tail program, championed by the United States and built by Boeing, officially collapsed. All 7 partner nations abandoned it. Then came the move that sent a message to Washington. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney ordered a formal review of Canada's existing $19 billion F-35 contract with Lockheed Martin. His government cited rising trade tensions with the Trump administration as a direct factor. Saab responded quickly. The company submitted a formal proposal to Canada covering 72 Gripen fighters and 6 Global Eye surveillance aircraft, a single package designed to replace the F-35 deal entirely and close Canada's surveillance gap at the same time. But the real story is just beginning. The facts behind this shift are hard to ignore. The Pentagon pulled out of the E-7 program in July 2025, citing escalating costs, repeated delivery delays, and serious concerns about whether the aircraft could survive in modern contested airspace, where advanced missiles define the threat. On November 13, 2025, the Netherlands Ministry of Defense confirmed the program was finished, stating publicly that the strategic and economic foundation had eroded beyond repair. NATO currently operates 14 Boeing E-3A Sentry aircraft. Those planes entered service in 1982, built on a Boeing 707 airframe from the 1950s. They are scheduled to retire by 2035, giving the alliance less than 10 years to replace its entire airborne command network. On the Canadian side, a late 2025 public opinion survey found that 43% of Canadians now favour acquiring the Gripen fighter. Only 13% still prefer the F-35 exclusively. And Saab itself reported 100 billion Swedish kronor in signed orders during the final quarter of 2025 alone, the strongest quarter in the company's history. Something significant is shifting. And to understand why, you need to know what the situation looked like before all of this happened. Until mid-2025, the path forward seemed settled. The E-7 wedge-tail had been officially designated as NATO's next-generation airborne command aircraft. Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Norway, Romania, Luxembourg, and the United States were all committed. The plan was to replace the aging E-3A fleet and keep NATO's surveillance capability intact through the 2030s and beyond. Canada, meanwhile, had signed its F-35 contract in 2023. The deal was considered closed. Saab's Global Eye was not a serious contender for NATO's core architecture at that point. It was seen as a capable but niche platform, suitable for smaller nations, not alliance-wide adoption. Then, Washington walked away from its own program, and everything changed. But something else was happening behind the scenes. The consequences of these decisions are already being felt across governments, industries, and military planning tables. NATO faces a genuine capability crisis. With the E-7 dead and the E-3A retiring by 2035, the alliance has less than a decade to field a replacement. Major defense procurement programs typically take years from contract to delivery. The math is uncomfortable. France's decision to choose Global Eye changes the calculation for every other NATO member still evaluating options. At least 9 countries are now formally assessing Global Eye as their primary surveillance solution. When a major ally signs, it validates the platform for everyone watching. For Canada, the stakes extend beyond aircraft. Saab's proposal projects approximately 12,600 Canadian jobs, 9,000 linked to Gripen assembly, and 3,600 connected to Global Eye production at facilities in Ontario and Quebec. Bombardier's Global 6500 airframe, which forms the base of Global Eye, is already manufactured at a $670 million facility near Toronto Pearson Airport. The Canadian industrial infrastructure for this program is partially built. That means CARNEY can respond to Trump's demand that Canada spend more on defense with a domestic jobs argument, just without the American contractors. And this is where the situation becomes more complicated. The surprise is not simply that Saab is winning contracts, it is where Saab is winning them. Colombia, historically one of Washington's most reliable defense partners in Latin America, signed a $3.6 billion contract for 17 Gripen fighters in November 2025. Ukraine's President Zelensky visited Saab's factory in Linkping and publicly expressed interest in acquiring between 100 and 150 Gripen aircraft. Ontario's Minister of Economic Development personally travelled to Sweden to offer provincial incentives for Canadian production. A political realignment that would have seemed unlikely 2 years ago is now documented in signed contracts. The deeper consequence here is strategic, not just industrial. Trump's trade pressure on Canada was designed to reinforce American economic leverage and push allies toward American defense products. The result appears to be the opposite. Canada is now publicly evaluating a deal that would remove Boeing and Lockheed Martin from its defense architecture entirely and replace them with Swedish technology assembled by Canadian workers. CARNEY's F-35 review is not purely a procurement decision. It is a signal. It tells Washington that Canada has credible alternatives and is prepared to use them. That changes the negotiating position in every trade conversation that follows. France's move carries the same message for Europe. By choosing Global Eye over an American platform weeks after the American-backed E-7 failed, Paris demonstrated that European NATO members are building procurement independence, not as a statement of hostility, but as a practical response to unreliable delivery and political uncertainty from Washington. The long-term industrial consequences extend well beyond the initial contract values. If 9 NATO nations standardize on Global Eye, Boeing and Lockheed Martin lose not just the aircraft sales, but decades of maintenance contracts, upgrade cycles, and integration work. The financial gap between winning and losing this competition is measured in the hundreds of billions over a 30-year horizon. Saab is no longer competing at the margins. It is competing for the center. What started as a Boeing procurement failure has become something larger. A chain of decisions, the E-7 collapse, France's contract, Canada's review, Saab's record order book, is reshaping how Western nations build and buy military capability. Mark Carney has answered Trump's pressure with Canadian jobs and strategic independence. France has answered NATO's capability gap with a platform that wasn't supposed to be the frontrunner. The 2035 deadline does not move. And with every contract signed, the window for a different outcome narrows. The decisions expected in 2026 will define Western defense architecture for a generation. What do you think? Is this a permanent shift, or does it reverse when political tensions ease? Let us know in the comments and subscribe so you don't miss the next development when it lands.